For centuries, we've been told a story, a neat, tidy timeline of human civilization. But what if that story is a lie? Hidden beneath layers of earth, suppressed in forgotten archives, lie discoveries that defy explanation. Artifacts that predate history itself. Structures that challenge our understanding of ancient technology and knowledge. From sophisticated pre-Columbian technologies to global finds that shatter archaeological dogma, these are not mere anomalies. They are pieces of a forbidden puzzle. Join us as we journey beyond archaeology to uncover the 7 suppressed discoveries that will force you to question everything you thought you knew about human history. Prepare to have your mind opened and your reality reshaped. Our journey begins in the deep mines of South Africa, near a small town called Ottosdal. For decades, miners working in the Wonderstone silver mines have been pulling something extraordinary out of the ground. They are known as the Klerksdorp spheres. At first glance, they might look like simple stones, or perhaps ancient cannonballs. But when you hold one in your hand, you realize that nature doesn't work this way. These objects are perfectly balanced spheres, ranging from 1 to 10 centimeters in diameter. Some are a dark metallic blue, others are reddish-brown. But their most striking feature is the series of 3 perfectly parallel grooves etched around their equator, as if they were turned on a precision lathe. Now here's where the story gets uncomfortable for mainstream science. The rock they are embedded in is pyrophyllite, a mineral that formed approximately 2.8 billion years ago. Let that number sink in for a moment. 2.8 billion years. According to our current understanding of biology, the only life on Earth at that time was simple, single-celled organisms, cyanobacteria. There was no one to craft a tool, no one to smelt metal, and certainly no one to design a balanced sphere. Yet, here they are. When these spheres were first examined, some researchers claimed they were so perfectly balanced that they exceeded the measuring limits of the laboratory's technology. One story, often told by the curator of the Klerksdorp Museum, Rolf Marx, suggests that a sphere kept in a vibration-free glass case would slowly rotate on its own axis, as if driven by an internal power source we cannot see. Mainstream geologists, of course, have an answer. They call them limonite concretions. They argue that these spheres formed naturally through a process of sedimentary precipitation. They say the grooves are the result of pressure from the surrounding rock over eons. But this explanation feels hollow to many. Why are they so perfectly spherical? Why are the grooves so precisely parallel? And why, when cut open, do some of these spheres reveal a strange fibrous interior that turns to dust when exposed to the air? If these spheres are natural, they are a freak of geology that we've never seen anywhere else in the universe. But if they are artificial, then we are looking at the oldest technology ever discovered. We are looking at a fingerprint left behind by an intelligence that existed long before the continents had even finished forming. Were they sensors? Were they part of a massive ancient planetary machine? Or are they simply the discarded toys of a civilization that saw the birth of our world? Whatever they are, the Klerksdorp spheres remain a silent, metallic defiance to everything we think we know about the deep past. For our 6th discovery, we travel to the remote wilderness of southern Siberia, specifically to a place called Mount Shoria. For a long time, this region was only known for its rugged beauty and harsh winters. But in 2014, a team of researchers led by Georgy Sidorov stumbled upon a site that has since sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. They found a wall, but not just any wall. Imagine, if you will, granite blocks of such staggering size that they make the stones of Stonehenge look like pebbles. We are talking about megaliths that are estimated to weigh upwards of 3,000 tons. To put that into perspective, the largest stone ever moved by modern man, the Thunderstone in St. Petersburg, weighs about 1,500 tons. The blocks at Mount Shoria are double that. As you look at the footage, pay attention to the precision. These are not jagged, natural rock formations. These stones feature flat faces, sharp 90-degree angles, and perfectly straight seams. They are stacked one on top of the other, reaching a height of 40 meters. In some areas, the joints between these multi-ton blocks are so tight that you cannot even slide a razor blade between them. Mainstream geologists often dismiss Mount Shoria as a result of magmatic differentiation, basically saying that nature just happened to crack these rocks into perfect cubes. But there is a massive problem with that theory. Nature rarely produces straight lines, and it almost never stacks massive blocks in such a deliberate architectural fashion. Furthermore, many of the stones show signs of strange, localized magnetic interference. Compasses go haywire when brought near the seams, and electronic equipment has been known to malfunction. This suggests that these stones aren't just sitting there. They might have been part of an ancient technological system. Some researchers suggest the site was a massive energy harvester, while others believe it's a remnant of a pre-cataclysmic civilization, a culture that existed before the last great flood, possessing the technology to soften or levitate stone as if it were clay. But perhaps the most chilling part is the location. Mount Shoria is high up in the mountains. Even with our most advanced hydraulic cranes and heavy-lift helicopters, moving a 3,000-ton block to this altitude today would be an engineering nightmare, if not an outright impossibility. So, who built it? How did they move stones that outweigh our modern capabilities? And why was this massive fortress, or temple, built in the middle of the Siberian wilderness? Mount Shoria stands as a silent, monolithic reminder that our ancestors weren't just primitive, they were giants of engineering whose secrets we have long since forgotten. For our fifth discovery, we are heading to the coldest, most desolate place on Earth, Antarctica. But we aren't looking at the ice, we are looking at what lies beneath it. In 1737, a French geographer named Philippe Buache published a map that should have been impossible. You see, officially, Antarctica wasn't even discovered until 1820. Yet here was a map nearly a century earlier depicting the frozen continent with staggering detail. But it's not the timing that's the mystery, it's the geography. Buache's map does not show Antarctica as the single, massive, ice-covered landmass we see today. Instead, it depicts the continent as two large, distinct islands separated by a vast inland sea. For over 200 years, historians laughed this off as a mistake, a cartographer's fantasy. They believed Buache had simply guessed and failed. But then, 1958 arrived. During the International Geophysical Year, scientists conducted the first-ever comprehensive seismic surveys of Antarctica. They used sonar and deep-crust imaging to look through miles of solid ice, and what they found chilled them to the bone. Beneath the ice sheet, Antarctica is exactly what Philippe Buache drew in 1737, a subglacial archipelago divided by a deep waterway. Now, consider the implications. According to our climate records, the last time Antarctica was free of ice was millions of years ago, long before humans supposedly existed. Yet, the Buache map shows the continent without its icy shroud, accurately depicting mountains and valleys that are currently buried under 4 kilometers of frozen water. How is this possible? Philippe Buache claimed he didn't discover this information himself. He compiled his work from ancient source maps belonging to the Ottoman Empire and ancient Greek mariners. This suggests a terrifying truth, that thousands of years ago, a global civilization possessed the technology to survey the entire planet, including the South Pole, long before the ice ever claimed it. Were these the maps of Atlantis? Or perhaps the records of a seafaring culture that flourished during a forgotten warm period of our Earth's history? If someone was mapping the subglacial topography of Antarctica while the rest of humanity was supposedly living in caves, then our entire timeline of human development is nothing more than a house of cards. The Buache map isn't just a piece of paper. It's a photograph of a world that mainstream history says we were never meant to see. For our fourth discovery, we climb the treacherous, wind-swept peaks of the Himalayas into the heart of Nepal and Tibet. Here, stories of gods from the stars are woven into the very fabric of local culture. But in the late 1940s, a Polish professor named Robin Evans reportedly found a physical object that transformed these myths into a chilling reality. It is known as the Laladoff plate. At first glance, it looks like a simple stone disc, about 9 inches in diameter. But as you look closer, the carvings tell a story that feels more like modern science fiction than ancient history. The plate features a perfect spiral design, a spiral that many astronomers say is a precise representation of a Milky Way-like galaxy. But it's what sits at the end of that spiral that defies explanation. Carved clearly into the stone is a figure that we today would instantly recognize: a gray alien. It has the classic bulbous head, large almond-shaped eyes, and a small, thin body. Standing right next to this entity is a disc-shaped craft, hovering above the ground with what appears to be beams of light or energy emitting from its base. The plate is estimated to be at least 12,000 years old. Think about that. 12 millennia ago, when our ancestors were supposedly just beginning to transition from hunting to basic agriculture, someone was carving images of galactic spirals and extraterrestrial beings into solid stone. Critics often dismiss the Lolodov plate as a hoax or a misplaced ritual object. But they struggle to explain the iconography. How did a primitive culture understand the spiral structure of our galaxy? A fact that modern humanity only confirmed with powerful telescopes in the 20th century. And why is the figure on the plate an exact match for the entities reported in thousands of modern close encounters? The Lolodov plate is often linked to the legendary Dropa stones, hundreds of similar discs found in the caves of Bayan Karaula, which allegedly tell the story of a spacecraft that crashed in the mountains 12,000 years ago. Whether the plate is a survivor of that crash or a tribute built by those who witnessed it, the message is clear. We have never been alone. Our ancestors didn't just look at the stars. They spoke with those who came from them, and they left this stone record behind, waiting for a generation that was finally advanced enough to understand it. For our third discovery, we travel to the remote and volcanic peninsula of Kamchatka in the Russian Far East. This is a land of fire and ice, but in 2012, it became the center of a scientific firestorm. A group of archaeologists from the University of St. Petersburg were exploring a remote wilderness area when they chipped away at a piece of volcanic rock and found something that sent chills down their spines. Embedded deep within the solid stone were hundreds of interlocking metal gears. This wasn't just a single cog or a stray bolt. It was a complex mechanical assembly, a machine frozen in time. Now, here's the part that defies all logic. The rock containing these gears was dated to the Paleogene period. That means these mechanical parts are approximately 400 million years old. To put that in perspective, 400 million years ago, the first forests were just starting to grow. Dinosaurs wouldn't even exist for another 150 million years. According to every textbook on Earth, the only life forms present were fish and primitive plants. So, how does a machine, built with precision-engineered gears and high-purity metal, end up inside a 400 million-year-old rock? Archaeologist Yuri Golubev, who examined the find, stated that the gears appeared to be artificially manufactured. They weren't natural crystal formations. They had the distinct shape and symmetry of a clockwork mechanism, or perhaps a sophisticated navigational computer. The metal used was a specific alloy, designed to resist the immense pressure of the Earth over eons. Mainstream science has tried to bury this discovery, claiming it must be a misinterpretation of fossilized sea creatures called crinoids. But anyone who has looked at the high-resolution scans can see the difference. Crinoids have organic, soft edges. These are sharp, geometric, and mechanically interlocking teeth. The Kamchatka gear fossil presents us with a terrifying choice. Either our understanding of geological time is completely wrong, or an advanced technological civilization was operating on this planet hundreds of millions of years before the first human ever stood upright. Were they visitors from another world, or is the history of life on Earth far more complex than a simple climb from the primordial soup? This fossil isn't just a curiosity. It's a smoking gun that proves the industrial age might not be a modern invention, but a rediscovery of a technology that existed when the world was still young. For our second discovery, we dive beneath the crystal-clear waters of the Bahamas, specifically near North Bimini Island. On the seabed, 20 feet down, lies a massive, ancient structure that has haunted the dreams of archaeologists and treasure hunters for over 50 years. It is known as the Bimini Road. Discovered in 1968 by Joseph Manson Valentine, this isn't just a pile of rocks. It is a half-mile-long path of massive, rectangular limestone blocks, some as large as 13 feet across. They are laid out with such deliberate precision that they look like a grand highway leading to a city that no longer exists. Now, mainstream geologists are quick to dismiss this as tessellated pavement, a natural phenomenon where beach rock fractures into neat squares. But there is a glaring problem with the natural explanation. When divers began to excavate beneath the blocks, they found something that nature simply doesn't do. They discovered leveling stones, smaller rocks placed strategically underneath the massive slabs to keep the road flat against the undulating ocean floor. This is an engineering technique used in the construction of ancient Roman roads and modern highways alike. But the real mystery of Bimini Road isn't just in the stones, it's in a prophecy. 30 years before the road was discovered, the famous sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce predicted that the ruins of the lost continent of Atlantis would be found in the waters off Bimini in either 1968 or 1969. To the shock of the world, that is exactly when and where these stones appeared. Carbon dating of shells embedded in the rocks suggests they were submerged around 12,000 years ago, the exact same time that global sea levels rose dramatically at the end of the last ice age. This coincides perfectly with Plato's account of Atlantis being swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. Was Bimini Road a harbor wall, a breakwater for a massive port, or a sacred walkway to a temple of a forgotten civilization? The establishment wants us to believe these are just random cracks in the seabed. But as you look at these perfectly fitted blocks stretching out into the blue abyss, you have to ask, are we looking at a geological fluke, or are we staring at the last remaining evidence of a global empire that was wiped off the face of the earth before history even began? We have reached our number one discovery, and it is the most unsettling of them all. For decades, we believed that humans were the only intelligent, upright species to ever rule this planet. But in 1928, in the desert peninsula of Paracas, Peru, archaeologist Julio Tello discovered a massive, complex graveyard. What he pulled from the sand wasn't just ancient remains, they were the skulls of a race that shouldn't exist. Now, we've all seen photos of head binding from ancient cultures, where wooden boards are used to flatten a child's head. But the Paracas skulls are different. Physically, biologically, and genetically, they defy that explanation. First, let's look at the anatomy. A human skull has two parietal plates, the bones that form the top and sides of the head, connected by a seam called the sagittal suture. These skulls, they have only one massive parietal plate. There is no seam. Furthermore, these skulls have 25% more volume and are 60% heavier than any human skull. You can bind a head to change its shape, but you cannot increase the volume of the bone or the size of the brain. It is physically impossible. But the real bombshell dropped in 2014, when geneticists conducted the first DNA tests on hair, skin, and teeth samples from these remains. The results were so shocking that the researchers hesitated to release them. The mitochondrial DNA showed unknown mutations not found in any human, Neanderthal, or Denisovan ever recorded. The lab reports suggested that we were looking at a new, human-like creature that was so genetically distant from us that they likely couldn't even interbreed with modern humans. They had larger eye sockets, a completely different jaw structure, and their foramen magnum, the hole where the spine enters the skull, was positioned further back than ours, suggesting a different way of walking. Who were they? Were they the Nephilim mentioned in ancient texts, or a separate branch of humanity that evolved in isolation, or perhaps off-world? Mainstream history wants to bury these skulls in museum basements because they prove that the human family tree is much more crowded than we were told. They were the elite, the long-skulled rulers of ancient Peru who possessed knowledge and DNA that we are only now beginning to decode. The Paracas skulls aren't just a mystery, they are a mirror. They force us to ask, if we weren't the only ones here, who else shared our world? And more importantly, where did they go? These 7 suppressed discoveries prove that our global history is far older and more complex than we ever imagined. But as we look across the oceans, a specific mystery begins to emerge. One that the textbooks have fought the hardest to ignore. Deep within the jungles and beneath the ancient soil of the Americas, evidence has been found of a civilization that shouldn't exist according to the official timeline. Let's dive deeper into the pre-Columbian finds that are finally breaking archaeology as we know it. Welcome back to the Anomaly Files. In this section, we move beyond speculation and dive into the concrete, physical evidence that simply refuses to fit the textbook narrative. We're talking about artifacts that, by all established rules of history, should not exist in the layers of Earth where they were found. First, let's talk metallurgy. We're told that sophisticated metalworking in the Americas began relatively late, developing slowly. But then you encounter objects like the intricate metallic figures discovered in ancient burial sites across Colombia and Ecuador, sometimes predating known metallurgical techniques by millennia. These aren't just simple gold nuggets. They are incredibly complex pieces, often featuring alloys and craftsmanship that suggest a mastery of heat and shaping processes that were supposedly unknown. But perhaps the most baffling example comes from the shores of Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, the Fuente Magna bowl. This single, ceramic artifact, discovered in the 1950s, is arguably one of the most controversial objects in South American archaeology. On its surface, it features distinct geometric motifs common to the Tiwanaku culture. But on the inside, there are clear inscriptions that several scholars have identified as a form of Sumerian cuneiform or Proto-Cuneiform script, a language system from ancient Mesopotamia. Now stop and think about that. Sumeria is thousands of miles away across 2 oceans and existed thousands of years before the accepted date of this bowl's placement. The conventional response is to dismiss it as a hoax, but physical analysis suggests the bowl is genuinely ancient, found in context with other Tiwanaku pieces. If this inscription is authentic, it blows the timeline of transoceanic contact wide open, suggesting connections between the Fertile Crescent and the Andes that conventional history cannot, and often refuses, to explain. Moving from metallurgy to the mind, let's explore the intellectual impossibilities. We often see ancient American cultures through a lens of primitive technology, but their knowledge of the cosmos and their engineering feats tell a vastly different story. Take the Maya. Their calendar systems and astronomical observations are breathtakingly accurate. They track the complex cycles of Venus with precision that rivals modern calculations. But how? With what tools? They supposedly lacked sophisticated optical instruments or accurate chronometers. Their knowledge wasn't just observational. It was predictive, deeply mathematical, and built on an understanding of large numbers and astronomical cycles that challenges our definition of ancient knowledge. This advanced intellect extends to material science. In the region of modern-day Ecuador and Colombia, evidence of platinum metallurgy has been found in pre-Inca sites. Platinum has an extremely high melting point, around 1,168 degrees Celsius. Even in the Old World, European metalworkers struggled with platinum until the 18th century. Yet, ancient cultures in the Andes were somehow refining and working this difficult metal. This wasn't simple smelting. This required controlled, incredibly high-temperature environments. It forces us to ask, were we wrong about the technical limitations of these ancient societies? Did they possess a lost high-temperature technology? Finally, let's look at the monumental, mind-numbing scale of their construction. This is where the sheer physical impossibility becomes undeniable. We look at structures like Sacsayhuaman in Peru, a megalithic fortress near Cusco. The walls are constructed from immense boulders, some weighing over 100 tons. And here's the impossibility. These stones are fitted together so perfectly, so precisely, that you cannot slip a credit card between them. This technique is known as polygonal masonry. It's not just about brute strength, it's about geometric perfection and incredible skill. How were these colossal irregular stones quarried, transported kilometers up steep terrain, and then cut and shaped with such surgical precision, supposedly using only bronze tools and human labor? The accepted theory strains credibility. But the ultimate example of impossible engineering is found at Pumapunku in Bolivia. This site features blocks of stone, made of hard-to-work andesite, that have been cut with angles and flat surfaces so flawless that they appear machined. Look at the famous H-blocks, identical, interlocking components with internal grooves and drill holes. They are so standardized and precise that they suggest mass production using advanced tools. We're talking about precision comparable to modern milling equipment. If the builders only had stone hammers and chisels, how could they achieve cuts that are perfectly straight, perfectly flat, and perfectly right-angled across huge slabs of extremely hard rock? The scale, the precision, and the material all combine into a singularity of doubt. Pumapunku stands as a silent monument proving that someone, thousands of years ago, possessed a technology that has been erased from the historical record. If the anomalies in Part 2 challenged our assumptions about when advanced civilization existed, this next section challenges our most fundamental belief about the ancient Americas: the concept of isolation. The official story states that after the initial migrations, the New World was cut off from the Old World until the 15th century. But what if the oceans were highways, not barriers? The first piece of evidence is perhaps the most difficult for conventional archaeology to explain: botanical anomalies. Consider the sweet potato. This staple crop, native to the Americas, was widely cultivated in Polynesia long before European contact. How did it get there? Either it floated across 4,000 miles of open ocean, highly improbable, or ancient mariners transported it. We also see the reverse: the discovery of certain African gourds, or bottle calabash, appearing in archaeological sites in the Americas millennia ago. These seeds couldn't have survived the journey naturally. Someone had to bring them. But the most famous, and frankly, the most confounding mystery, deals with Egyptian mummies. In the early 1990s, forensic tests performed on ancient Egyptian mummies, including one identified as Pharaoh Ramses VI, detected trace amounts of narcotics like cocaine and nicotine. Cocaine is derived exclusively from the South American coca plant, nicotine from tobacco, native to the Americas. Think about that for a moment. How did these New World plants get into the bodies of Old World royalty thousands of years before Columbus? This suggests a consistent, two-way trade route between the continents, centuries or even millennia before the accepted date of 1492. Conventional history dismisses this, pointing to contamination or dating errors. But the evidence is chemical, consistent, and requires a truly extraordinary explanation to uphold the isolation model. The implication is profound. The world was interconnected on a scale we refuse to acknowledge. Now, let's look at the echoes of culture. If contact occurred, we should see shared ideas, a kind of cultural fingerprint across the globe. And we do. Start with architecture. Why did so many disparate cultures, entirely separated by vast oceans, independently develop the identical impulse to build colossal four-sided pyramids? From the Giza Plateau to Teotihuacan, the geometry is eerily similar, often oriented to specific celestial events. Was this a universal architectural inevitability, or the lingering legacy of a shared, older culture that transmitted this knowledge globally? Even more striking are the mythological and artistic parallels. Consider the motif of the plumed serpent, Quetzalcoatl to the Aztecs, Kukulkan to the Maya. This is a massive feathered snake deity that rules the sky and the waters. Now compare this to the iconography of the Asian dragon, particularly the serpent-like lung dragon, which also controls the elements and is a symbol of celestial power. Are these two highly specific, complex symbols, a feathered, flying serpent, merely a coincidence? Or did an idea, a piece of mythology, travel across the Pacific? The similarities extend even to creation myths. Nearly every major culture in the world, including the ancient Americas, possesses a story of a great flood that wiped out humanity, saved only by a righteous family in an ark or boat. To have such a specific narrative detail replicated in the Andes, in Mesopotamia, in China, and in Europe demands a serious consideration of cross-pollination. These aren't just similar ideas, they are specific, complex symbolic systems that suggest either a shared, hyper-ancient source or extensive, consistent contact. We conclude this section by focusing on the mother culture of Mesoamerica, the Olmec. Emerging around 1500 BC, the Olmec developed writing, sophisticated agriculture, and massive ceremonial centers, long before the Maya. But their identity presents one of the biggest challenges to the isolation theory. Specifically, look at the Olmec colossal heads. These massive basalt sculptures depict human faces wearing what appear to be tight-fitting helmets. The faces themselves are strikingly robust, featuring broad, flat noses, full lips, and heavy jowls. For decades, researchers have pointed out the undeniable visual resemblance to features commonly associated with people of African descent. If the Olmec, the foundational culture of Mesoamerica, are indeed representing visitors or a founding population that had roots in ancient Africa, it completely dismantles the Bering Strait theory as the sole entry point to the Americas. It implies that advanced, long-distance maritime travel was not only possible but happened, bringing people from the other side of the Atlantic to the Gulf Coast of Mexico thousands of years ago. Furthermore, some controversial linguistic theories suggest parallels between certain Olmec glyphs and symbols found in early African scripts. While fiercely debated, the collective evidence, the statues, the possible scripts, the botanical evidence, paints a picture of a pre-Columbian America that was not a forgotten, isolated continent, but a full and active participant in a vast global exchange of goods, genetics, and ideas. The Olmec heads are not just stone portraits. They are colossal proof that we must widen our lens and look across the ocean to truly understand who first shaped this continent. We've spent the first half of this video laying out the anomalies, the physical evidence that defies the established narrative, but it would be intellectually dishonest not to explore the other side of this great debate. The arguments put forth by mainstream archaeologists and historians who staunchly reject these claims. The general academic response to these anomalies is threefold: fraud, misinterpretation, or pareidolia. Take the Acambaro figures, those dinosaur figurines we discussed. Mainstream archaeology argues they are an elaborate, modern hoax created by local artisans to capitalize on tourist interest. They point to inconsistent dating methods and the sheer novelty of the finds. The argument is, essentially, if it's too good to be true, it's fake. When it comes to the monumental structures, like the impossible precision of Puma Punku or Sacsayhuaman, the argument shifts to a focus on time and labor. Academics don't deny the precision. They simply assert that ancient builders achieved it through an immense expenditure of time and an ingenious use of simple technology, not with lost high-tech tools. They claim that centuries of slow, painstaking abrasion with stone tools, combined with human ingenuity, explains the perfect fits. The precision is attributed to skill, not technology. For the cross-continental connections, like the Sumerian script on the Fuente Magna bowl or the cocaine mummies, the debate is even fiercer. The Fuente Magna bowl is called a modern forgery or a case of simple misidentification, that the script is merely local Tiwanaku iconography that happens to look like cuneiform, pareidolia. The mummy evidence is dismissed as modern contamination from museum handlers or the use of tobacco, cocaine in ritual settings long after the burial. The core belief remains: extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and to many academics the proof for pre-Columbian contact simply hasn't met that bar yet. So the anomalies have counter-arguments. But why is the historical community so fiercely resistant to even considering the possibility that a few of these counter-arguments might be wrong? Why is the debate often shut down rather than opened up? This leads us to the critical issue of suppression and the power structure of history. Historically, challenging the narrative is dangerous to an academic career. Archaeology, like any field, is funded by institutions, governments, and grants. If a young researcher publishes a paper suggesting a pre-Columbian connection to Africa, they risk losing funding, tenure, and professional respect. The pressure to conform to the established Bering Strait-only model is immense. This model is the bedrock of Western academic understanding of the Americas, and challenging it means destabilizing thousands of doctoral theses, hundreds of textbooks, and entire museum wings. We've seen historical instances where anomalous discoveries were literally hidden. One famous example involves the Smithsonian Institution's alleged dismissal or downplaying of reports concerning unusual skeletal remains, including so-called giants, that didn't fit the prevailing narrative of small, homogeneous populations migrating across the Bering Land Bridge. While these reports are often sensationalized, they highlight a pattern. If a discovery threatens the fundamental accepted story, it is far easier to dismiss it as a mistake, a lie, or a forgery than to engage in the painful process of rewriting history. Ultimately, the suppression of alternative theories isn't always a malicious conspiracy. It's often the simple inertia of a massive institution resistant to change. The current narrative, however incomplete, is safe and profitable for the establishment. This brings us to the final, necessary question of this section. Who benefits from maintaining the status quo? The idea of the Americas being discovered by Europeans is a narrative that historically justified colonization and conquest. If the Americas were isolated, technologically simple, and only waiting to be found, it reinforces the European perspective of superiority and discovery. If, however, the continent was part of a global, advanced network thousands of years ago, that entire justification collapses. The traditional narrative serves to simplify the past, control the present, and maintain a historical hierarchy. But for us, the independent thinkers and researchers, the answer lies not in finding fraud, but in seeking truth. We should respect the critical standards of archaeology, but we must also demand that they examine the anomalies without prejudice. Because until we fully confront these impossible artifacts and structures, the most exciting chapters of humanity's history will remain locked away, hidden beneath the weight of comfortable, but ultimately broken, conventional wisdom. In the past few moments, we have challenged the exact history of the pre-Columbian world. We've seen metallic artifacts that defy metallurgy, monumental structures that defy engineering, and genetic evidence that defies isolation. Now, let's stop debating the validity and start contemplating the meaning. What would happen if the academic world finally acknowledged these anomalies, not as hoaxes or errors, but as legitimate pieces of our global past? The impact would be nothing short of revolutionary. Firstly, it would utterly destroy the timeline of human migration. Instead of a slow, single-route journey across the Bering Strait, the new story would be one of simultaneous, multi-directional global travel. It suggests the New World wasn't just populated by Siberian tribes, it was visited by Africans, possibly Phoenicians, and ancient Asian cultures, all millennia ago. Humanity's maritime capabilities would be instantly redated, proving that our ancestors mastered global navigation not in the age of sails, but in the age of stone. Secondly, it would fundamentally rewrite the story of technological development. The precision of Puma Punku, the existence of platinum metallurgy, and the advanced astronomical knowledge of the Maya would mean that there were lost civilizations, cultures with technological capabilities that we assume are modern, but which existed, then vanished without a trace. It forces us to confront the idea of a cyclical history, where technological peaks were achieved only to be swallowed by catastrophe, leaving behind only anomalous remnants. This new history isn't just about dates and locations, it's about restoring the dignity and complexity of ancient human genius. It elevates the pre-Columbian cultures from isolated, slowly evolving societies to key players in a massive, interconnected, global human network. Accepting these anomalies doesn't provide all the answers. It simply gives us better, deeper questions to ask. If these cultures were so technologically advanced, why did they disappear? Was it climate change? Was it war? Or was it some cataclysmic event, like a massive asteroid impact or a planetary shift, that wiped the slate clean, leaving only the most resilient megalithic structures behind? The answer to the mystery of the anomalies may very well be tied to the mystery of the great destruction events in our planet's past. And perhaps the deepest question of all: where did the knowledge originate? Was it developed independently, then shared globally? Or did it stem from one singular, highly advanced mother civilization, a true global Atlantis, whose remnants sparked these technological and architectural booms on every continent? We stand at a crossroads. We can continue to trust the comfortable broken narrative, or we can choose to look at the evidence with fresh eyes, embracing the vastness of what we still don't know. The ancient world is not a closed book, it is a frontier. And every anomaly, every impossibility, is a clue leading us back to a human story far more incredible, complex, and profound than we have ever dared to imagine. The truth is out there, waiting for us to ask the right questions. What we've explored today is just the tip of the iceberg. Every artifact found, every suppressed site uncovered, is a reminder that the history we are taught is only a fraction of the truth. We are living on a planet with a memory much longer than our own records. The question is no longer if our history is being rewritten, but how much more remains to be found. Are we brave enough to look past the dogma? To accept that our ancestors might have been far more advanced, more connected, and more mysterious than we ever dared to imagine? The evidence is there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those with the eyes to see. As we continue to bridge the gap between myth and reality, one thing is certain: the past is not what it seems. If you're ready to question the narrative, subscribe and join us as we uncover more truths hidden in the shadows of time. The journey into the unknown has only just begun. Thank you for watching.